Today's lesson is on ratios and rates. First, let's talk about ratios. Here are three different ways to write the same ratio. All three of these, you say them 8 to 15. You could use the word 2, you could use a colon, or you can write it as a fraction, but all three of them mean the same thing, 8 to 15. So let's look at an example here. All right, we're talking about after-school jobs. Students were surveyed, and the number of students that have an after-school job is 40, and the number of students that don't have an after-school job is 60. So it says write a ratio of the number of students with jobs to the number of students without jobs. When you're doing a ratio, you have to make sure that the order that they stated in the question is the way that you stated in your answer. So here they want the number of students with jobs. So the number of students that have a job is 40 to the number of students without jobs. Well, the number of students that don't have a job is 60. So I'll write it as a fraction, 40 to 60. Very important that it's in the correct order. As always with a fraction, you need to simplify. So I can quickly see that both of these are divisible by 10 because they both end in 0. 40 divided by 10 is 4. 60 divided by 10 is 6. I can simplify this further because they're both divisible by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the number of students with jobs to the number of students without jobs is 2 to 3. Again, I can write it as a fraction. I can write it like this, 2 to 3, or with a colon. As long as it's simplified, all three of these answers are acceptable. Next problem. It says write a ratio of the number of students without jobs to all students surveyed. So number of students without jobs would be 60. To all students surveyed, well, I need to take the number that have a job and the number that don't have a job and combine them. So 40 plus 60 is 100. And then again, I need to simplify. Divisible by 10 because they both end in 0. So 60 divided by 10 is 6. 100 divided by 10 is 10. Both of these are divisible by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So that would be 3 to 5. I can write it like this, or with a colon, 3 to 5. Unless it states in the question which way to write it, all three of these would be acceptable. If they say to write it with a fraction, then make sure you write it like this, 3 to 5. Okay, so since we did some examples, I want to give you the definition now of a ratio. It is a comparison of two numbers by division. Make sure you make this chart because we will be comparing ratios to rates. Now the funny thing is that the definition of rate is exactly the same. It's a comparison of two numbers by division. So how do you tell the difference between ratios and rates? Well, ratios have the same units while rates have different units. Let me explain that. If you look at the problem we just did, we were comparing the students that have a job to the students that don't have a job. But ultimately, what were we comparing? Students to students. That's the same unit, so it's a ratio. Make sure you write that down as an example here in your chart. Students with a job to students without a job. An example of a rate would be miles to hours. Miles per hour, you might have heard that before. Feet per second. Those are rates because miles and hours are different units. Okay, so we talked about ratios already. Let me explain rates now. Typically when you're discussing rates, you usually refer to rates as unit rates, and that would be a rate that has a denominator of 1. Let's do an example with this. It says 676 miles in 13 hours. So if I drove for 13 hours and I traveled 676 miles and I want to know my average speed, you cannot you can't just look at this and tell what my average speed was. You need to get it so that it's a unit rate, so that it has a denominator of 1. So the way you do that is you take the first number, 676, and simply divide it by the second number, 13, which would be 52. But remember, that's not the final answer because a rate is a comparison of two numbers by division. So I need to take that 52. I need to label it because now that I'm talking about rates, since my units are different, I need to label it. So it's 52 miles per 1 hour. Now I have a denominator of 1, so this is a unit rate, 52 miles per hour. That would be my average speed. It also tells me how many miles I traveled in 1 hour. One more example like this, $57 for 6 hours. Let's say I worked 6 hours today, I made a total of $57, but I want to figure out how much I made per hour. So I take the first number, 57, divided by the second number, which is 6, and I get 9.5. Now this is incomplete for two reasons, because number one, when you're writing 9.5, remember we were referring to dollars, so I need to put the dollar sign, and I'm not just writing 9.5 because that's not how we write money. So it'd be $9.50. You have to add that zero on. $9.50 for or per 1 hour of work. It's a unit rate because the denominator is 1 and it tells me how much I made per hour. That's all for today. Bye.